Welcome to the call. This is our Lunch and Learn series with Whole Being Institute. And today we are going to be discussing living well despite adversity with Harriet Cabelli. The death of a loved one, divorce, illness, disability, event. I'm muted now. Hang on one second. Let's just sorry. Do over, take two. Sorry, everyone, for the recording. Let's just do that again. Welcome to the call, everyone. My name is Caroline Kohles. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. And today is our Lunch and Learn series, a series with the Whole Being Institute. We're going to be discussing living well despite adversity with Harriet Cabelli. Death of a loved one, divorce, illness, disability, and any critically life-changing circumstance can become a springboard for growth and change and lead to newly created rich and meaningful living. In this session, Harriet Cabelli, social worker and positive psychology coach, will lead a conversation about resilience and coping and how not only to survive but thrive in the face of loss and challenge. She is the author of Living Well Despite Adversity, Inspiration for Finding Renewed Meaning and Joy in Your Life. Her work is inspirational and hopeful, showing that we have more strength and inner resources than we realize. We just have to access them. Harriet Cabelli is a licensed clinical social worker and positive psychology coach. She counsels clients as they cope and grow through grief and loss, challenges and adversity. She helps them rebuild their lives with renewed purpose and joy. She was one of the coaching experts on 970 AM radio program, The Answer, Conversations with Joan. She has also appeared on ABC and Fox News as a parenting coach. She facilitates empowering women's groups as well. Living Well Despite Adversity, Inspiration for Finding Renewed Meaning and Joy in Your Life is her first book. Welcome to the call, Harriet. And it turns out that Harriet and I actually know each other. We've danced together. She's been a NIA student and in the NIA training with me, and it's so good to talk to you and have you back on the call.
I know, this is great. Hello. Hi, everyone. And it's so wonderful to be here. I feel like I'm coming back home because, as Caroline said, I used to take classes with her in NIA dance when I had my little tiny apartment overlooking the Hudson on the Upper West Side. I have a house in Long Island, but I had a little place there, and it was wonderful being with Carolyn. So to have this opportunity, it's like, wow, we've come full circle. And Phoebe, who invited me to be a speaker, is also coming full circle because I went through the Whole Being certificate program in positive psychology. I was the second grouping of people, and it was actually Phoebe whose name I was given to ask for a recommendation when I was questioning, should I do the program? Because she was in the first cohort, I was in the second. So it's like, the universe is amazing, how things come together and people come together eventually. So it's very cool.
That's
so thank you.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm actually in the current cohort and I'm learning so much and I'm having such an amazing, wonderful time. Highly recommend the SIP training, which is the Certificate in Positive Psychology by the Whole Being Institute. Harriet, what a fascinating topic. What inspired you to write your book?
So,
can you tell us that story?
Yes, I will tell it to you and hopefully not drag it out too much. I have 3 daughters. My middle daughter was born with neurological disabilities. And fast forward 18 years, she then underwent a medical crisis separate from her neurological disabilities. And she was hospitalized for a year where she did not have a very good prognosis, and they really thought that would be it. And I sat by her side for a whole year watching every beep and bleep of all her machines she was hooked up to, witnessing the fragility of life firsthand and trying to keep myself afloat. And she was on a respirator for 4 months and then moved to a rehab for 8 more months. And I basically lived with her for the year between the hospital and the rehab. And she miraculously survived, miraculously fully recovered and has her life back against all odds. And after coming through that year, which is now about 14 years ago, I said to myself, I need to do something with this miracle. People do things when they don't have good outcomes. They start foundations through their loss and their grief, and they do all kinds of things to regain a purpose after a horrific outcome. I had an amazing outcome. I had a miracle. And I felt that when I went back to work and kind of resumed my life and just picked up the pieces as before, I had a lot of angst and things were zhuzhing in me. And I said, this just doesn't feel right. I feel like I need to be doing something more to honor this miracle that I witnessed. And I, as her mother, felt that I had a second lease on life. So I was a school social worker at the time in the New York City public school system. So I attempted all kinds of nutty things, as my kids said. I foster raised a puppy. He went on to succeed and went on to live with a little boy with cerebral palsy. I did a Patch Adams clowning trip in Sicily, visiting orphanages and jails and all kinds of things. And I was really like searching. And all of those things were meaningful to me, but I was looking for like that one big thing. And then I attempted a book, and I got about 40 rejections, and eventually the agent said to me, this is an evergreen theme, put it down and try again later. And what was my theme what was my book I was striving for at that time was a memoir of the year of my daughter's hospitalization, all she went through and how we coped and blah, blah, blah. So that didn't work out. Then I started a blog, and I actually started a blog from a class I took at the JCC on the Upper West Side. I forgot. Oh, I even think it was with the woman who does the Happiness Project, Gretchen Rubin. I think I took a class with her on starting your own blog. So I started a blog, and I decided that my project was going to be something I was always interested in since I'm a teenager, which is how do people deal with adversity? How do they like survive and go on? Because as, again, just backpedaling a drop, when I was 18, I had a boyfriend whose mother went through what I consider hell and back, numerous challenges and adversities, and yet had the most optimistic outlook. And I love this woman. So when I broke up with my boyfriend, who cared about him? I cared that I was losing her. So that was a very defining moment for me. And I was always interested in how is it that some people seemingly have it all, at least on the external appearance, and are so bitter and negative and suffering on the inside, whereas other people seem to have a lot of stuff, a lot of challenges, and they have so much more vivra and positivity. And I was just always interested in that. So I figured with this blog, I'm going to do something that I was always interested in, because I kind of got sidetracked when I became a school social worker. I had gone through a divorce, and my mother said, go into the school system, you get summers off, you could be there for your kids, and blah, blah, blah. So I did that. Ended up doing that for 20 years. But when my daughter went through this, which was like in the middle of that, maybe 10 years into it, I said, I got to do something else. So I stayed in my job, but I started this blog, and I started interviewing people once a month. Again, this was my baby, my project. Nobody told me to do it. Interviewing people once a month who had overcome adversity, some type of adversity. So in the end, I interviewed once a month for 3 years. I got 36 people, some of whom, surprisingly to me, because I'm no Diane Sawyer, some of whom are well known. For instance, and I'll just throw this name out because she connected to the JCC also, Meredith Vieira. I had gone to a lecture that she gave at the JCC, and afterwards at the what do you call it? The snacking after, there's a word, I can't think of it.
The meet and greet.
The meet and greet, but there's a word. Anyway, I went over to her. I got up my nerve and I said, you know, nice to meet you. I'm doing this book. I'm interviewing people. Would you be interested? And blah, one thing led to another. And oh my God, yes, she became one of my interviewees. And I got most of my others through books, people who wrote memoirs, because I'm very into reading and I love memoirs. I reached out to people and 36 people graciously accepted. Another person known to most of you, she wrote the book Wild, Cheryl Strayed, around the loss of her mother when she was young, and then did this hike for 6 months alone to deal with her grief. Temple Grandin, a tremendous advocate for people on the spectrum who have autism, and she's a professor in animal husbandry out in Colorado. So people who, yes, have some names, but also regular everyday people like you and me. And I formulated questions about how did you cope? What advice would you give to people? How have you come through this? What were some of the difficulties? I had a list of questions, and basically this is how it came about. And then I had all of these up on my website, and people started telling me, what are they doing up there? Why don't you just compile them into a book? And that became my book. So I like to say that this became an outgrowth of my daughter. Her name is Nava, her miracle. I didn't start a foundation. I didn't change the course of my life and move out God knows where. I did a lot of inner growth, which we might get to talk about after, called post-traumatic growth. And my book became my baby in terms of putting out hope and inspiration and hopefully lessons that other people going through things can maybe learn from or take some into their lives. And somebody once called this, and I'm going to use their term, it is a diversity of adversities that I highlight here. There are all different types, from people who lost children to people who've become paralyzed to people who've gone through all kinds of illnesses, drug addiction, horrific accidents, and have come through it, and not just come through it, but grown and thrived. So that's kind of the context of this. So we can talk a little bit about some of the themes that have come through some of these interviewees.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm wondering if you could let us know, what were the questions that you asked? It sounds like you sort of asked everyone the same questions or similar questions. And then what did you notice? Did you notice any universal themes in all of the interviews? Or it's kind of like amortizing all the data, right? Asking these very, very diverse group of people about their human experience. And then was there anything that you concluded from this?
Right. So some of the questions, and the person, if some of you may know the website Tiny Buddha, it's a pretty well-known website on self-development. And Lori Descheny, the person who manages this and started it, she really helped me with this. So, you talk about how do we build resilience? One of the ways is when we know we're doing something, we reach out, we ask for help, we go to people who know things that we don't, and we're not afraid to ask. So she was an amazing, really, support to me. So some of the questions were, what personal qualities have helped you carry on and move forward? Was there a specific moment or epiphany that helped guide you to a new place mentally and psychologically, or was it kind of an evolving process? What were your day-to-day coping skills that kept you afloat? What thoughts propelled you forward? In general, how have you managed to recreate your life through this transitional challenge or situation? And what advice can you offer others going through their critical life transitions and changes? So that was, I changed it here and there very little, but in general, I wanted it to be general so people of all different types of situations can, hook into it.
Did your background in positive psychology shape those questions? It reminds me of, our exemplars and how Maria Serra was talking about stories and how we can actually look to, for our best self, for examples of people that have actually overcome things or who have, that we admire. Did that influence your choice of questions at all?
It did, because the timing was perfect. I had started this before I took the positive psychology certificate program. And then I completed it, and I was really motivated after the year-long program. I completed it, after I finished the program. So I went back and I tweaked a lot of the questions, a little bit different wording. But what it did for me is after each interview, I put in my own take. Like I pull out some themes from each interview, and then I do my own little, not a long, a paragraph or two critique. That was 100% after my positive psychology program, and it totally influenced me. And just as a caveat, I want to say, and I'm not being paid to advertise the program, but going through this positive psychology program for me was the greatest thing I've ever done in my life, both personally and professionally. And I tell everybody, it is life changing. So yes, it totally informed that aspect of my book, and it informs my life today, and certainly the work I do with clients and my groups.
Wow, that's quite a testimonial. What I'm wondering is, going back to that original question, did you notice any similarities? Were there anything about these stories that were
Yes.
really challenging for everyone that you interviewed? And did you notice any similarities?
So there's a couple of things. One biggie, and as a social worker who works a lot in the area of grief and loss, this is huge, and certainly nowadays with emotional intelligence, everyone spoke about the importance of allowing the feelings of pain and grief to go through us, to run its course, and not to push it aside and not to numb it. Because, and I'll quote from Tal Ben Shahar, he always says, it's like we have one pipeline. And if we shut down the negatives because we don't want to deal with them, we're also shutting down the positives, and we don't feel that, and we push it aside. So we're, as human beings, given a full palette of emotions, and that enriches our life, the pain and the good. Everyone here spoke about the importance of allowing and giving ourselves permission to grieve, and that it's when you go through it that you eventually come through it. Now, when my daughter was diagnosed, if I may just say, when my daughter was diagnosed with her disabilities when she was less than a year, I went to a grief counselor. Really, that also changed the course of my life. I went through a grief counselor, and for 1 year, that's all I did was rant and rave throughout my difficult emotions that I just couldn't let sit here because it was too toxic. And when I used to say to him, what is the recipe? Because by the end I felt, oh my God, so much lighter, like the noose around my neck of grief was loosened. And he said, there is no recipe. And I hate to use the word because people laugh at it, but it's the process. It's the process of allowing ourselves to feel it and go through it. And like the clouds, things loosen, they shift, they come and they go. We're not stagnant, and we need not be afraid of them, of the feelings. So that's one thing that was a theme throughout.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was going to ask you that because it seems so much that I hear from people, I'm afraid to feel, or it's so intense. Right. And I also think that it sounds like you got help with that, and that you'd you would advise that this is a journey to travel with a professional or a social group or something like that. Would you say that's true? Was that true for a lot of people, or did they do it in all kinds of different ways, some being in nature, you know?
So they did it in different ways, but another theme, to go back to what you asked, another theme that came out very strongly with a lot of people is to ask for help, whether it be professional help while you're going through a challenge, or just your neighbors, or you need food, to ask for help, because that seems to be hard for a lot of us. I think we're quicker to offer our help than to receive it, because we feel like maybe receiving is a sign of weakness. I could do it myself. I don't need it. But actually to ask for help is a sign of strength. That was actually one of Meredith Vieira's points that she talked about, besides humor, was the ability to ask for what you need and get that support. People aren't mind readers, and that's sometimes hard for us to do. I don't hear you.
The question oftentimes is like, what can I do, or how can I help you? But it's actually, what do I need in this moment? Would probably be the better question to ask, right?
To ask ourselves, right?
Yes.
What do I need in this moment? And then for the other person, for the supportive friend, to be able to say, or just be proactive and say, I'm just going to sit with you. I'm just going to come over and bring a donut and coffee. That's also important. And I interviewed Letty, and I don't know if I'm going to say her name right, Pagrobin. She's also spoken at the JCC because
Program, yeah.
She had written a book about how do we support a friend going through cancer or any type of adversity, and how do we support them in ways that are helpful? Because sometimes we say, I'm here for you, give me a call, I'm here whenever you want to talk, but that doesn't really help, because that puts the onus on the person who's going through their difficulties and their pain. We need to be the proactive one to be able to go in and see what they need and offer and step up and be there, even if we do nothing concrete. Just sit with the person. And that is beautiful, to be able to sit with someone in pain in silence without even saying anything is very healing. So it's two-sided.
Yeah, it reminds me of the beautiful expression of, I walk with you.
Yeah.
Right? I walk with you right now as you go through this.
Right.
And sometimes there are no words. There are no words. It's just really that physical presence of being near somebody, right, and saying, I am with you. Or even writing them an email and saying, you're on my mind.
Right. And I have it's funny that I think about this still to this day. I have a cousin who lives in Massachusetts. And when I was going through that year-long medical crisis with my daughter, you're not into making phone calls. Every week, my cousin Marcia would leave me a message and say, thinking of you, hoping for the best, no need to call me back. I take that with me because that's what I now do. You know how sometimes we'll make a call and then a week, oh, they didn't even call me back. No, I guess they're not interested. We personalize it. I'm saying to someone who's going through a really rough time, that was such a lesson for me. And I have to tell her that, right? Talk about expressing gratitude to someone. I really have to tell her, because when we're specific in what we appreciate to another person, that goes a long way. But that was a life lesson for me, that when someone is in pain, we reach out to them with no expectations, because it's not about us. And I just thought that was very, very powerful for me. And I do it to this day. I'll leave messages, I'll text, no need to call back, checking in, not even asking a question, thinking of you, that type of thing is very supportive.
It reminds me of what Tal Ben-Shahar says, what is the saying? The appreciates the good.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Maybe Phoebe can write it
when
in.
you appreciate the good appreciates.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's
such a great line. He's got so many great lines. When you appreciate the good appreciates. When you start seeing the good that's around you, then you start noticing more of it. So, it's like when we see a rose. I like to use this example. When we see a rose bush, are we the person who says, don't go by the rose bush because you'll get stuck with the thorns? Or are we the person, and then we don't even notice the rose because we're too focused on the thorns? Or are we the person who sees the rose bush and says, I see the thorns, I'm going to walk carefully, but man, that rose is gorgeous. And then when you see the rose, suddenly you start seeing more flowers because you're focused on the positive. So more positivity or more positiveness comes into your purview. You know what it's like also when we wake up sometimes and we're grumpy and we say, oh, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed today. And then it kind of sets off your whole day. And that's how I used to think, like we all do. Oh, that's it. My whole day is ruined because I woke up on the wrong side. As opposed to saying, and then everything else like spirals down because we have that headset and that mindset, right? As opposed to saying after an hour, oh, I really woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I'm feeling like grumpy today. What do I need to do to shift that? So with that intentional mindset, we can shift and say, okay, well, that doesn't mean my whole day is doomed. Just means that first hour got off on the bed on a wrong foot, but let me not spiral. Let's start to see what is working well. That www, what's working well. I love that. Martin Seligman, right?
Beautiful, right? And also back to that self-care, that self-compassion. What do I need in this moment? It also seems to me that your book must have been about perspective.
Mhm.
And can
Right.
you talk about the strength of perspective or and how that factored in it? Because if you're going to have something that happens to you and you're going to get the gold out of that or see the pond and the swamp, see the
Mhm.
reality of that. Because
Mhm.
what I love about positive psychology is that most of the positive psychologists that I meet are realists. They see that life is tragic. They
Right.
see that life is tough. But they also, and they choose to recognize that. But then they make another choice to also see, as you were talking about with the rose bush, the thorns and the rose.
Right.
And then to focus on the rose so that that is what, you know, expands and grows.
Right.
So this, it seems to me like your book would be about perspective and how that factors into our resilience. Can you talk
Right.
more about
Right.
that?
So I know Maria Serrois talks about the power of the word and. And that's really important because we're not Pollyanna-ish, like, oh, tra la la, this is terrible, but, okay, I can see all the good. No, it's reality-based. People are suffering. Right now, we're suffering. But that doesn't mean that there also can't be some joy, some laughter, some goodness there. And again, all of the people basically in my book spoke about the idea that, yes, there's tremendous pain. Ann Hood, an author, wrote about, I interviewed her, she spoke about the death of her 5-year-old. Of course, that's the worst thing is for a parent to lose a child. And over time, she was able to rebuild with other new insights, new reasons to go on. She started then writing more. She started her knitting clubs. I mean, things we don't look for the bad so that good comes out of it. But once there's bad, we need to know that we can also have goodness again, to be able to hold on to the hope of a better future, albeit in a different form, in a different way. But that's the piece of integrating the challenge, integrating the loss or the adversity into our lives and reshaping it differently. In other words, when I got my daughter's diagnosis, that's her diagnosis for life. Nothing is changing there. So what had to change was me in terms of how am I going to now rebuild my life with new expectations, with a new reality, and what's going to come of that, with new dreams, right? Because we can't stay attached to an old one that's gone, because then we stay stuck, and that's not living well. That's spiraling down and saying, hey, it didn't work out, I'm done. That's being a victim. But rather inputting a new reality and rebuilding new dreams and new goals. And that's basically what I was seeing from everybody in these interviews. The pain doesn't go away. It's kind of like it stays, but we build around the pain so that we begin to expand ourselves. We lose a parent, we lose a child, we lose the function of our legs. It doesn't come back, but what does is healing. So what is healing? Healing isn't getting back what we lost. Healing is figuring out ways that we could still expand ourselves around our pain so that we can bring in joy and new meaning into our lives. And that's like the concept of broken and whole. In Japanese, there's a concept, kintsugi. It's an art form where they take shattered and broken pieces of pottery and they put lacquer, gold lacquer on it. And it becomes this new beautiful piece with gold lacquer streaming through it. And in actuality, it was broken. So the idea of broken and yet whole, that is very powerful. And that was throughout the book as well. And if I can give one personal thing on that, because this just is so powerful to me. So my daughter had a trach. And as I'm sure most of you know, from a trach, you get an indentation in your throat. Now, some people have plastic surgery so that you don't see it. And I remember when my mother said, you want her to have surgery to close up the hole? I said, no, she's been through hell and back, no more surgeries, and certainly not anything elective. And then I read Catherine Zeta-Jones's quote, because she had a trach and she has a hole, which is why she wears a lot of chokers. When she was 6 months old, she got that from, I think, a bad case of bronchitis. I'm not sure, some respiratory thing. She said, I wear it as a badge of courage. And that became my mantra for my daughter. She wears her indentation or her hole, and people will still look and ask today. That's her badge of courage. Talk about resilience, right? She grew around it.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that idea of our journey creating us. It reminds me of Kathy Washburn, who was talking about being carved from cancer. That's the name of her company, and she was one of our guests. And how, it's not that we asked. She said, I didn't ask for cancer to happen to me. It's like you don't have to look for the bad, is what you were saying earlier, Harriet. And I thought that was so important. But when it happens, how are we carved by it? What do we make out of it?
Right.
And you said that Viktor Frankl has been very influential for you.
Yeah,
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. I wish I would have met him. He wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And for those of you who haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's, to me, life-changing. I read it first in college, and I have read it so many times. It's his experience of his being in numerous concentration camps during World War II. He was a psychiatrist out of Vienna, and he survived, obviously, and he formulated this theory called logotherapy, which is the therapy of meaning and purpose. And he discovered, after he was freed, I think he wrote that book in less than 10 days. He said in about 8 days he wrote it. It's a classic, Man's Search for Meaning. So basically, his finding, I mean, there's tons of gems in there, but his finding was that people who had a purpose, who had something to look forward to. For him, it was his manuscript that he wanted to then give over as his college course when he got out. They took it from him, they probably burned it, but he was committed to redoing that. And he saw in his mind the day when he could stand back up in front of an audience and present that paper. And other people who, they had a crumb of bread, and instead of just hoarding it for themselves, they would go over and share a piece, a crumb of a crumb, or put their hand on someone else who was even worse off. So people who seem to have something outside of themselves to hold on to or to give to seem to do better. So, I mean, there's a lot there, but I want to read 2 quotes because I think they're very important to this whole piece when we talk about things that happen to us, bad things that happen to us, adversity, challenges, losses. He says, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way. That was life-changing when I first read that at 18, because I always thought, as I'm sure many of us or many people think, that it's all about our circumstances. It's what happens to us. This was my first eye-opener to the idea of, aside from my boyfriend's mother, it's not just what happens to us. More so, it's how we respond to what happens to us. It's what our attitude becomes, how we shape ourselves through it. We could look at Nelson Mandela, tons of people we could highlight and say, oh my God, how did they go through 30 years in jail and come out intact? I mean, to me, this is inspirational. I love these kind of stories. But even now during COVID, we have a horrible situation, very difficult. It's uncontrollable. It's a circumstance that came at us. How do we respond? That is in our choice. That is in our purview. Right? We can choose to just say, okay, I'm just sitting here vegging out for 3 months feeling lousy. Or we could choose to say, I don't have a gym and I'm an exercise person. What can I do? Well, I can jump rope in the house. I could turn on music. I could go outside around my block for a walk. Again, these are choices. So we don't have to become totally stymied by the negativity that befalls us. But again, that becomes a choice. We have to recognize that it is in our power to make those choices, however small they are. We're talking tiny choices, But again, as Tal Ben Shachar always said, tiny things can make big differences.
Beautiful. So important. And where does purpose come into this? When you were interviewing all of your, the people that your heroes, really, they're, to me, it seems like they're heroic, what they've overcome. Did purpose or potential or having a vision of what they wanted to be or showing up as their best self, did that factor into it at all? I mean, knowing what you do about positive psychology and certainly your background as a therapist, were you looking to see, gosh, how are they managing this? Are they using forward thinking? Are they saying, I can't control anything, but I can control how I show up? And was that a motivating factor?
Right.
Were they saying things to themselves?
Right. So purpose, I want to hone in on that word purpose because that is so important. And I kind of delineate purpose with a capital P from purpose with a small p. Because purpose with a capital P for me is, that existential purpose. What am I doing on this earth? Why was I born? What is this life all about for me? But purpose with a P is very transient. In other words, when my daughter was in the hospital for a year, I had a purpose different from the rest of my life's purpose because I wasn't focused on, am I going to teach? Am I going to be a therapist? It was, I got to get up every single morning and stand by her bedside. It's very easy to get depressed and say, how the heck am I going to do this? But I became very clear in what my purpose was, purpose with a small p. My purpose was to get up and be her cheerleader by her side for 12 hours a day. That was in her rehab, as she was pushing through all her exercises and doing what she needed to do to reclaim her life. My purpose, because I could have gone back to work part-time and her father could have been up there and lived there, but I didn't. I chose to stay there for the year because it became very clear that that was my purpose. And once we connect with that, it's like a coping skill. I was able to function much better because, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to be her cheerleader. I don't know how long it's going to be, but for now, that's what I'm here for. And every day, that's what I woke up to. And if I can give you another example of a P with a small p and how it helps us in coping. In other words, it's not necessarily what am I here on this earth for, but that's why I said purpose becomes transient. It changes based on what we're doing in our lives. Someone who retires is going to have a different newly designed purpose, possibly, than when they were avidly working in their 40s. We recreate purpose based on what we're going through. So when I fostered a doggie, and it was really hard the first couple of months, and I was ready to give back the dog who came with a manual of instructions, yay big. I said, this is ridiculous. It's too much. I decided, again, after struggling back and forth and talking about with my husband, that why did I do this to begin with? What was my purpose here? It was to do something to give back after Navi's miraculous recovery. It was to connect with the world of disabilities because I was going to train a dog to live with someone who had disabilities. It was my way of giving back. So when I started to connect again with the reason, it became a bigger reason than just, okay, it's a big aggravation because he's chewing a shoe or because he's pulling me on the street or whatever. When I became clear why I was doing this, and people said to me, are you crazy? How are you going to give back the dog? It'll be so sad. And I honed in on, wait a second, but I'm doing this for a bigger reason. And then I became able to hone in and deal with it better. So I think that purpose is huge in helping us cope and in giving us that raison d'etre. In other words, again, during COVID, what are we waking up for if we're just going to stay in our pajamas? Well, some of us are waking up to be aggravated and help our kids through a million Zooms. As aggravating as it is, it's a purpose. Some of us are waking up to just say, I'm all alone, but I want to reach out to those who have it even worse than me. We have to connect with purpose, certainly during difficult times. And then when everything's going well, we can try to re-envision and say, okay, now what? Does that answer? I know I just honed in on the purpose piece.
No, I think it's
that's really important. I just want to read one of my favorite quotes from Nietzsche. He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how, right? When we have a why, what's my purpose? What am I doing? We can bear with the nitty gritty of the daily difficulties because we have a bigger reason why. Why can parents function as parents usually? Because they're raising kids to be independent human beings. That doesn't mean the everyday is so easy. But when we stay focused on what's that big picture here, and we kind of connect with that and hook into that, doesn't mean it's easy peasy, but it certainly keeps us on the path.
In the grieving process, when does purpose come in? You were talking about, I know it's not a linear process for sure,
Right.
but
Right.
you know, we talked about like that vessel that we only have one that Tal Ben Shahar was talking about. So we need to let the feelings flow through. And
Right.
as a dancer, and you love to dance too, that makes so much sense, right? We don't want anything to be blocked. It's kind of like the garden hose when it gets a kink in it, then there's no water coming through. But and then we talked about purpose and finding the why and actually redesigning it. Do we find in grief, as you counsel people, do you find these little mini purposes along the way? Or when can we start connecting to that why?
That's such a great question, Carolyn. Wow. So in terms of like redesigning a purpose or reconnecting with something bigger, or what can I do with the death of this person? What's the legacy? That kind of comes a little bit later after we've gone through the real intense feelings, because we're not really capable of being over there with, okay, I'm going to start an organization. Okay, I'm going to do a book. Okay, we got to go through the feelings first. We just have to. We can't go there while we're just shut down. It won't work. But what you said was interesting. But along the way, do we have little purposes that get us up in the morning? Yeah, because for that exact reason, so that we do get up in the morning and we don't throw the covers over our head and say, I'm done. Now, sometimes that's also okay. You know, pity parties is okay once in a while. We all need that. I came home many times from the hospital. I mean, oh my God, who wouldn't? And bury myself under the covers and say, I can't do this. That's it. I'm done. It's not that we do it. It's if we stay there and how long we go under the covers and how long we stay under and say, I can't do this, as opposed to, okay, we give ourselves permission to have our pity parties. And then we say, what baby step can I take? What is my purpose to get up? I can put my feet on the ground. I can get into a shower, you know, real baby steps for people who are going through grief. And then see what it is. Maybe it's, I have to take care of my other child. I have to take care of my elderly parent. I have to be there for my spouse who's going for treatment, whatever it may be. But we have to, but that bigger purpose or that bigger redesign doesn't come until later.
That makes absolute sense. It's almost like we have to accompany ourselves. We have to walk with ourselves as we're going through this grieving process, right? We have to just be compassionate and almost hold ourselves.
What a beautiful way to say it. Yes. And that's the self-compassion piece, for sure, which we're all lousy at, by the way, right?
I hear, though, that if you practice, it gets better.
Right. All of this is a practice. We got to practice so much. How do we live? We're always practicing.
Well, you know the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Practice.
Practice.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, you know, Dan Tomasulo's work is about learned hopefulness versus learned helplessness. Can you talk about that at all? I mean, as a therapist, can we sort of learn helplessness, and then how do we switch that, especially with grief?
Well, I don't know the person you're referencing, but I mean, I don't know him personally or his work, but the idea as you're saying it resonated, brought up for me, Martin Seligman's 3 Ps in terms of learned helplessness and hopefulness. The 3 Ps being, when someone's going through a very challenging time: personalization, permanence, and pervasiveness. In other words, are we personalizing it that this is me? It's only happening to me. This is all about me. Is it permanent? Is it going to just like, this is it? I'm done. It's lasting forever. And is it pervasive? Does it go across everything? So someone loses a job. I'm not minimizing it. That's horrible. But that doesn't mean they don't have their health. It doesn't mean they don't have their family. It means they lost a job, and we can hold that as a separate entity and work around that and problem solve. But when we get into that blackness, it's coloring everything in our lives. It's pervasive. It's going to go on forever. I'm never going to feel better. That's a mindset of helplessness. And that really, really does a number on us. And that's where being mindful and thinking through the idea that, wait a second, yeah, this is horrific, but can I see that there may be a light? Maybe I can't see it yet, but we have to hold that somewhere. We have to, otherwise it's too easy to sink in. And sometimes that's when people really need the help, which is nothing wrong with getting it. I felt it when I got my daughter's diagnosed. I said, that's it. Talk about pervasive, my life's done. Shattered dreams, I'm done. Permanence, pervasive, it is permanent. A disability is permanent, but it's so not so if you work around it, if you realize there's so much more, there's expansiveness around problems and challenges.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. And it also, I love that you addressed that is a time when we need to get help, right?
Yeah.
And that we don't want to let ourselves sink so low. It's interesting, isn't it? We want to be able to feel everything and process those feelings. But at the same time, we want to also still have the light at the end of the tunnel. It's almost like we need to shift and refocus and say, okay, what do I need to do today? And have those little mini purposes so that we still keep functioning while we're feeling.
Yeah, that's a great line. Function while we feel. That's beautiful. But, when I was going through my stuff years ago with my daughter, I didn't know any of this. This wasn't even in my purview of awareness or knowledge. All I knew was I needed help. And that was the beginning of my journey. So I would say when people are really at a low point, instead of just saying, what can I do? It's the first thing you do if you really feel, oh my God, I'm in this deep, dark cave, is you do reach out for help. And most people, again, most of these interviewees that I interviewed, reached out for help in some way, shape, or form.
Right, and we want to just say that, and that's super important. What was the thing that surprised you the most about writing this book?
That people said yes to me when I asked them. It was like, who am I? I'm not, like I said earlier, I'm no famous I'm no Oprah, Diane Sawyer. They don't know me, and I'm asking these people, can I interview you? Either by email or by phone. And that was what surprised me, that people were so gracious and in saying yes.
And what did you learn that surprised you?
I learned that we have, as humans, incredible untapped potential that resides in all of us. And that, unfortunately, until or unless we go through something horrific, we don't really realize the strength that we have. Now, we don't have to realize it because we don't want to go through those things. But A, we have tremendous inner strength, and B, there is tremendous potential that is going so untapped. Now, I have to use another example because this blew me away. From my own neighborhood, I didn't even know him, but I found of him in a newspaper article. This man who was run over not far from my house, became a paraplegic, and decided to, again, show that I can still live well. He rode a manual wheelchair from California, where he eventually moved out to because he was trying to become an actor with his disability. He rode a manual wheelchair 3,000 miles from California back to my neighborhood, where they had a whole parade down my big street and welcomed him. And it was like, and there's a documentary out about him also. And it was like, wow, the potential. So we are our own worst enemies. We limit ourselves by saying, I can't, I won't, it's too much. I mean, when you look at some of these people, it just blows you away. We can do a lot more than we think. And we are the ones who stop ourselves by saying, I can't do this. That's not me. I can't do that. You know, before, years and years ago, I would have said, I can't do a public speaking. I'm too shy. I'm too quiet. That's not me. And because I had to give groups when I worked for the Board of Education, and I had to suddenly be on a stage addressing parents and in small rooms doing groups, you know, you do what you have to do, right? And with practice, it became, oh, maybe I could do this. Maybe I do it a little bit. And then again, you evolve and you blah, blah, blah. And suddenly you're doing things that you never thought in a million years you could do. So the power of our potential is limitless. And that's one of the biggest takeaways.
Beautiful. And we have a couple of questions from the chat. Have you found common strengths? You know, we have the VIA Strength Survey. Did you find common strengths in the people that you interviewed?
Yes, humor. Humor was a very big one. Even within the darkest times, finding humor. Support. Always reaching out for support, for friends to talk. So it was connection, humor, really the power of the mind that we can, this gets into a whole, but a few people were really big on the idea, people quoted from Wayne Dyer, the idea that we're not what we think. And we can really train our minds to think differently. That was pretty powerful that I read, because I'm not so up on that, but that came across from a lot of people as well. So yeah, those were a couple of things.
There was a question about the documentary about the gentleman.
So I have to look up I have to get that for you, but the name of the person, if you just wait 1 second, is
Sure.
Gabriel Cordell, Cordell. That's his name, Gabriel. I think it's called Roll On.
That's
but
perfect.
I'm not sure. I think
talk about humor.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
That's
if I could look it up while you're talking, I'll quickly look it up. But otherwise,
No, I think Phoebe's doing that, so you don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
And then Joni was talking about the power of the word yet. Maybe I can't do this yet.
That's right. Maybe I can't do this yet. That comes under that big umbrella of Carol Dweck's growth mindset, right? Where our abilities are not fixed. It's not like, well, what our IQ was when we were going into first grade, that's it, I'm done. I can't do math, that's it. I can't do computers and technology, but you learn a little bit here and there, and then you're proud of yourself. It's the power of the yet. So we say, I can't do technology. Oh, here's an example. Was I going to do a PowerPoint today, right? I was asked, I think Phoebe asked me, I said, I'm not good in technology, I can't do it. I can't do it yet. One day I'm going to do my PowerPoint. I'll get there, but not yet. It means it keeps us open to learning and growing. It doesn't say, oh no, that's not me, I'll never do it because I'm technologically challenged. It's the idea that I'm open to it. I haven't done it yet, but I want to learn, because that's part of our growth as humans. We're always learning, and that's the excitement of being alive.
Beautiful. Now, Linda was asking about this, and I think it's an important thing. In the grieving process, or in the, something's happened to us, COVID. And then we had, the awareness, of course, it's been with us all along, but the Black Lives Matters and the protests. And now we have the reopening, but now we're not going to reopen. And then we have it. Do you know what I mean? It feels like one thing keeps coming. So the cascade. And so you have the micro goals of getting up and getting through this and getting through this. But how do you shift from the micro goals to the bigger goal? Like, how do you do it and not get stuck in just taking care of? And I hear this with parents sometimes, like, I took care of my kids for 20 years and I had a career before, and now they've grown up, and now what do I do? Because what they did was sort of the day to day.
Right. So, but for the situation now, Listen, it's very hard. I mean, I don't have an answer for that. It's very hard. Again, we have to give ourselves permission to feel we're in a very shaky world now, shaky time, very unpredictable, and everything's out of our control. And as humans, we like control. We need control. So we just look for our little ways that we have control and influence, and we could make our own mini decisions, and then just be open to the unknown. It's hard. I mean, I have conversations with my daughter, my younger daughter, all the time about school. What do you do? I mean, up and back. We have to just allow for that. I know it sounds hokey, but that's the space we're living in, that unknown, that shakiness, that we don't know an end. There's no closure to this. It's all open-ended. That open-ended feeling is very anxiety provoking. I mean, I feel it. And we have to just be with that. I know that it's not a concrete answer, but that's the best I have.
Well, I think it is actually. I think in some ways it's like what we were talking about earlier, which is being a realist. This is where we are, and then how am I going to show up? And
Right.
what am I going to do today?
Right.
And maybe we do postpone the big P, or for some of us, it's like, wow, it's clearer than others. I think we're all on our different paths, wouldn't you say? It seems like
Right.
we're all
Right.
we're all facing the same thing, but we're in a different place with it, depending on our context. Depends is somebody you like. I know that my niece is living with me, so that is a different, because of COVID. So that's different. That's a different reality.
Right. And everybody has their realities. My daughter, who has the disabilities, was living with me for 4 months. She just went back to her supportive apartment Friday. That's a whole anxiety provoking piece for me, because am I doing the right thing? Is it the right time? I don't know, but she was having too many meltdowns being home. She wanted to be in her own life again. So all these decisions are really, really hard, because who knows? Like, after a while, you do the best decision making with the information you have, and it's kind of like you throw your hands up and say, okay, I leave it to a higher power or God, whatever your belief system is. But this is hard stuff. Yeah.
And so was your book. Can you show us the cover of it? You did that so quickly. Yeah, hold it up and bring it right to the screen so we can see it.
Take no credit for the cover. I love the cover. My graphic design person did it.
That's awesome. I'm going to just, let me spotlight you for a moment so we get that.
With the book?
Yeah, give me 1 second. I just think it's great, and I think that sometimes, especially right now, we want to have that. Oh, hold the book up one more time. There you go. Living well despite adversity. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
Call. I mean,
I'm so glad you asked me, and you are such a great interviewer, and you ask and you reframe things so beautifully. Oh my goodness.
we also want your email, because I'm sure there's going to be some folks that have questions, and thank you so much for saying that. I love it. I love, like you do, interviewing all of those people. That was your passion, and finding out, like, how did they make it? What's the difference between those that get the gold and really reclaim their lives and are shaped by their experiences, versus those that aren't able to do that?
Exactly.
It seems like that was, from a very early age, one of your questions.
Yeah.
And for me, hearing people's stories too, right? It all starts with stories is really one of the
stories. Yes, but it gives such hope when you see the possibilities, and that we don't have to let our challenges define us. We can rebuild differently around it and with it, and formulate a new tapestry, right? With the hurt.
Absolutely. And on Thursday, we're going to talk more about this. We're going to talk about how to work with our strengths. So this was a great introduction this week to talk about, like, really adversity and challenges and what to do. And I love that you quoted Viktor Frankl, and we might go ahead and have you say that quote one more time. And then we're going to be speaking with Sonia on strengths on Thursday. And then on Wednesday night, everybody, I'm going to be interviewing Alyssa Rocco. And she is an expert coach, but she went through something really challenging with addiction. And we're going to talk about vices and addiction and sort of the dark side and hear from her how she overcame that. That's completely free. That's on the JCC website. And that's called Learning to Human Better. So everyone, thank you so much. Thank you to the Whole Being Institute. Please be safe and be well. And let's go ahead and end with that quote, Harriet.
The Viktor Frankl quote that I read. Okay. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way.
Uh-huh. Be safe, be well, everyone.
Thank
Please
you.
take care of yourselves. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.